Hi everyone, today we're going to take a look at a new lens from TTArtisan. It's their 10mm f2 super wide angle rectilinear lens for aps-c cameras. So it's going to be available for your crop sensor like Nikon, Fuji, Canon, Sony, and also for micro four thirds. And full disclosure, I'd like to thank TTArtisan for sending this lens out to me to review, but as always, I'll give you my honest and fair opinion. So let's just start with the basics. Like all the lenses I've gotten from TTArtisan, they're very well made. Beautiful all metal construction, metal lens mount, and the focusing ring is very well dampened. Also has a clickable aperture. It clicks in half stops, it looks like, from f2 all the way to f16. And the aperture ring is relatively stiff, so you're not going to accidentally bump it in the field, and change the aperture. And even though this is at a very budget-friendly price, it has a very premium feel to it. Now, it also has a built-in metal lens hood, albeit it's very short because of the super wide angle, and they've included a push-on plastic front lens cap to protect the front element. But what's kind of unique is they've also included a 72mm ring adapter so that you can attach filters like a polarizer or ND filter. But I don't recommend using variable ND filters on such a wide angle lenses because sometimes you get that X pattern or shading. And they've also included a screw-on metal lens cap, so you never have to take this filter ring adapter off, and that's how I prefer to use it. Alright, so let's talk about some of the optical qualities of this lens. And I think at this price point, meaning well under $200, this lens is very good and probably better than most at this focal length. But again, at this price point, don't expect perfection. There's definitely some compromises. So overall, this lens is very similar to most lenses, meaning wide open at f2. It's a little soft. It's not its sharpest. It's acceptable, and I would use it for casual use, but nothing, don't pixel peep it at f2. It improves quite a bit at f2.8, and at f4 it's almost perfect, and f5.6 I say is probably the best you're going to get out of this lens. At f8 there's no change really, and at f11 is very similar to f8, just getting slightly softer, but by f16 it's pretty much back to what I was getting at wide open at f2, meaning diffraction and everything's kind of set in, which is unavoidable, and the lens kind of gets soft again. All right, now let's talk about the corner-to-corner sharpness. And again, here we see some compromises. The corners are never quite as sharp as the center, regardless of aperture. Now that said, I think on such a wide-angle lens like this, corner sharpness is not quite as relevant because typically things outside of the center of the frame are going to be on a different focal plane and out of focus anyway. But let's say you're taking a picture of a brick wall, or more realistically, you're doing architectural photography where you are filling the frame corner to corner with the architecture itself, or maybe you're doing art reproduction of a painting where you want the corner sharp. Really, you need to be at f8 to get the best out of this lens, and at that point I think the sharpness is acceptable, not perfect, and certainly not as sharp as the center. And another thing I noticed was really the closer you get to the subject, the worse the corners get. So take a look at this image here where I shot it wide open at f2 at the minimum focusing distance. You can see the corners are extremely soft. And it's not just a depth of field problem. Also, even at f5.6, again, the corners just kind of fall apart pretty quickly. So you really need to be at least 1 meter away, preferably 2 meters from the subject if you're going to be filling the frame. And from about 2 meters out to infinity, the corners are as good as they're going to get, which isn't bad, like I said, between f5.6 and f8. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the sharpness of the lens. I really like the images that I got from it, the seascape, some of the architectural stuff, and even the night photography. And remember, I was shooting this on my Fujifilm X-H2, which is a 40 megapixel aps-c sensor, and that's really going to push the limits of any lens. And if you're shooting on a micro four thirds system, all of that softness in the corners is cropped out, and in that case, I would say that the sharpness of this lens is actually very good. Now, when we talk about optical qualities of a lens, it's more than just about sharpness, right? There's other things we need to consider, like barrel distortion, vignetting, chromatic aberration, flaring. And in these areas, I think this lens actually is very, very good. As you can see here, the barrel distortion is pretty minimal. In fact, most images I didn't even bother to correct for it. And when I did, say I'm doing some architectural type photography or street photography, then I would just dial in just a little bit, like a 10 on my slider. And then for vignetting, even wide open at f2 is pretty nominal. It's very easily corrected in post. and chromatic aberration was virtually non-existent in the center, and then out to the corners there was a little bit there. And again, this is something that's very easily corrected in post-processing. And when it comes to flaring, it's actually not that bad. I mean, I have much more expensive lenses that flare worse than this, because it's hard to avoid with a super wide angle lens. But that said, even when you do get the flaring, it's generally not that harsh, and you can actually use it to a creative effect. And this is especially true if you like sun stars, where you get those very sharp flaring off pinpoints of light, and it does this without much ghosting or any ghosting at all. And also, you don't have to stop the lens down too much. I mean, I was getting sun stars at f4. Now, bokeh or blurry backgrounds and wide angle lenses are not two things you normally associate together, but this lens does have a very fast f2 point aperture, and if you get close enough to your subject, you can achieve this effect. So when you sum up all of the optical qualities together, you basically have a super wide angle 10mm focal length with virtually no distortion and minimum vignetting. You have a very fast f2.0 aperture, and it's relatively sharp, especially at f5.6, and it creates beautiful sun stars. This is the kind of lens that you can go out and have a lot of fun with and be very creative. And that pretty much sums up what I think about this lens. I mean, I was having a great time with it, doing the landscapes and seascapes and architectural and street photography and the close-up photography. And I'm even trying to think of ways to use it for portrait photography. So can I recommend this lens? I think in that context, absolutely, especially at this price point. Now, if you need to do professional architectural work or art reproduction, I mean, you need to get a professional lens. This is not the lens for you. But if you think this lens is kind of interesting and you want to have some fun, I'll have the links down below. You can check out the current pricing. I know it's under $200, but I've seen the price fluctuate a little lately because of the availability. But in any case, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this review. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.